Hello guys, my name is Riker. This is going to be my first BookTube video. I'm not really sure how this is going to go. What I'm going to do is I've read 14 books in the first 4 months of this year up until today. So I'm going to go over all through those. The first book that I read in 2018 was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I really wanted to go into 2018 with a new perspective on life. I wanted to be more confident. I wanted to do this more. And I love the cover. I love the title. I think it conveys a really, really good message. And I liked the first 50 pages of it, but after that, it just didn't do it for me. It just felt really, really repetitive after that first 50-page mark. It just kept saying the same things over and over again. But it has a really pretty cover, and I love the title, and I love the message that it gives off. And there's some good things in it, don't get me wrong. But I ended up rating it 2.5 out of 5 stars. Now, the next book that I read in 2018 might be my favorite book ever, and that is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This book is about this virtual reality world. The real world has kind of gone to crap, but this new virtual reality world is where people work, where people go to school, where they have fun, where they hang out. And basically, the best way I can describe it is capitalism is trying to take it over, and this guy's trying to stop that. The main character and some of his friends are trying to stop that, and it's so action-packed, and the relationships in it are so cool. I rated this book a 5 out of 5 stars. It's the only book on my list so far that has a 5 out of 5 star rating, and I absolutely loved it. I finished it in a day. I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning trying to finish it because I had to know what happened. I could not recommend this book enough. I have not seen the movie yet, and I want to see the movie. So good. So the next book I read in 2018 was Warcross by Marie Lu. When I first started reading a couple years ago, more seriously, I read her Legend trilogy, and I finished it in like 4 days. It was so, so good. I ended up rating this 4.6 out of 5. There were some parts in it that were just a little bit flat for me, but the parts that weren't flat, everything else was so good. The main character in this book is a bounty hunter, and she's been hired to find this person who's been hacking these games inside of this virtual reality world. And they're causing real havoc on the players and on the games and the integrity of the games. And she's been hired to fix that. And there's a lot of twists and turns and parts where I was shocked. And I think the next book in this series is called Wildcard. It's going to be out later this year. So I am super, super excited about where this is going to go. The next book that I read in 2018 was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson is so cool. I absolutely love him. And when I found out that he had a book out, a short little book like this, it's so tiny. It's super, super tiny. And I finished it in a couple hours. I'm currently a chemistry major, and I have a real knack for knowledge as far as like astrophysics and space and cosmology go. And there's parts of this book that help me understand a large part of that that I didn't know before. And he does it in such a good format. He's so funny. There are points in this book where I was laughing my butt off. He's absolutely hilarious. And he does a really good job of explaining it to a point where, normal people will understand. So I absolutely love this. I rated it 4.5 out of 5. So the next book on my list, when I first started doing this watching BookTube videos, I was a big fan of Haley in Bookland. And this is actually her favorite book of all time. I think it still is. And that is The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak. This is actually a reread. The first time I read it was a couple summers ago, and I cried the first time I read it. The little girl main character is so lovable, and you get to see her grow up and become this independent young woman she's so cool. I ended up rating this book a 4.8 out of 5. There were a little parts in it that were a little slow for me. Probably, as far as historical fiction goes, this book and then another book that's coming up later are kind of the golden child of this genre for me right now. So, great book. The next book that I read, this book has been a little bit everywhere. It's been on the New York Times bestsellers list for several weeks now, maybe several months. I don't even know. But that is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This book is so good. It's very representative of some of the problems that are going on in our country as far as police brutality goes. So I thought it was very necessary. I didn't necessarily agree with some of the things that happened at the end. I wish she would have done it differently, but I'm not one to judge that. I think the main character in this book did everything in her power that she could, and she had the right to do some of the things that she did. So I rated this, I believe, a 4.6 out of 5. Great book. And I think Angie Thomas has another book coming up called On the Come Up, I believe. So I'm going to read that, and I'm super excited for it. And this is going to be a movie too. So a lot of these books are going to be movies. It's going to be awesome. So the next set of books that I read in 2018 were kind of all over the place right now. And that is the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman. I rated both of these a 4.75 out of 5. These books were so good. Basically, this world is full. Science is advanced to a point where there is no death. All people are immortal unless you are killed by a scythe. And these scythes are specially selected. And in this series, you follow 2 apprentices in scythe. In the second book is more about this AI, which is basically the government that controls. There is no actual physical human-ran government. It's all ran by this computer. And I am so excited to see where the next book goes. It's so cool. I'm so excited. So in the name of Neal Shusterman, I was on a Neal Shusterman high for a second, and I read Challenger Deep by Neal Shusterman. And I didn't get this book at first. I really didn't. It was on a book club list for a local bookstore of mine, and I thought about going. I never actually went, but beforehand, I didn't know what this book about. I went into this book cold. But it turns out, in retrospect, I probably would have understood it more had I known this before. Neal Shusterman's son, I can't remember what his name is, but his son struggled with schizophrenia. And basically, this is a story inspired. It's not his story exactly, but it's very much inspired by the struggles that his family and his son went through battling schizophrenia. And it follows 2 different perspectives. Basically, his reality, this main character, teenage boy's reality, and then when he's kind of in a lucid state, I can't remember exactly what they called it in here, but it follows basically his reality versus what he deems as reality, but it's really not. So super, super cool. I wish I would have known more about it going into it. I probably would have understood it more. I ended up rating it 3.5 out of 5 because I didn't feel like there was necessarily a plot to it, but looking back on it, I actually raised my rating knowing more what it was about. I didn't understand it at first, and I was blown away when I figured out what it was about. So definitely read it if you want to learn more about schizophrenia and some of the struggles that the families and the individuals go through. It's so good. So good. I'd recommend it. And the next book I read in 2018 was Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. George Saunders is kind of a legend amongst American literature. This book was really weird. This book was really, really weird. I've been wanting to read this book for a long time, just because I love President Lincoln. He's such an interesting character. It follows this perspective of these 2 ghosts that are living in an in-between state between reality, like real life, and heaven, or the afterlife. It's kind of an in-between state, and it's based off of that. And when President Lincoln's son passes away, he is kind of stuck in this spot because he doesn't know. He sees everybody. He sees his father, and he was really close with his father, with President Lincoln. And basically, it was just about moving on to the afterlife and not regretting our life, regretting things that we've done in our life. It's, there's nothing that could have been done in his case, unfortunately. It was interesting. It was very poetic. It just wasn't my style. I ended up rating this, I believe, a 3.5 or 3 out of 5, I believe. It was okay. Now, earlier I think I said something about another historical fiction book that's kind of all over the place, and this book should be no surprise to you. It is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I cried reading this book. It was fantastic. I rated this a 4.85 out of 5. It's a very long book. It reads longer than I think it actually is. Like I said, rated it 4.85 out of 5. A little bit of slow parts. It's basically about these 2 sisters who live in France, who are basically fighting to live, basically, and to keep France as they know it alive. I couldn't recommend this book more. If you're into World War II historical fiction, this is a must-read. It is an absolute must-read. Now, the next book that I read in 2018 is actually a series by Maggie Stivar. I've read the first 2 books in the Raven Cycle Quartet. I rated the first one, The Raven Boys, a 3.75 out of 5. And then I rated The Dream Thieves 4.0 exactly. I'm not super in love with the plot of these books. I've watched some of Poland Bananas, Christina, I think is her name. I've watched some of her videos on these books. Our opinions are very, very similar. The characters are so good. They're so good, and the plot is just enough to keep you in. I'm taking a little bit of break. I have the other 2 on my bookshelf. I'm going to read them at some point, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break from this series. It's such a cool, interesting concept. It just hasn't brought me in yet. The only reason I want to keep going is the relationships in this book. The characters are what drive this series, in my opinion, so far at least. I would say it's worth it. They're rated highly, and there's 2 more books left for me, so I'm gonna finish it at some point. But on to the next book. And then finally, last but not least, the last book that I read was Read All About It by Tyrell Reed. He's a former basketball player that played on the 2008 national championship team for KU. I've had this book since I was like 12. I've had this book for so long, and it's been on my bookshelf, and I've never read it. I actually read it yesterday, an entire day. Super quick. It talked about that specific year. I've always been a big Kansas basketball fan, and this was basically his memoir after he graduated and how he grew up in college and learned how to be a real man. And now he's playing overseas. At least he was. I don't know if he still is. But he got into medical school. He was a McDonald's or a academic All-American his senior year. So his name's up in the rafters in Allen Fieldhouse, which is a big deal. But I think if you're a Kansas basketball fan, this is a must-read. Absolute must-read. That is it. Those are all 14 books of the books that I've read so far in 2018. So with that, my name is Riker, and this has been my first book review. I will leave my Goodreads account in the description.